Excellent. Excellent. So good evening, everyone. So I'll start with introducing myself. So my name is Kate Frost and I'm the Head of Patient and Public Involvement and Engagement for Nottingham University Hospitals. And for want of a better word, I am the host of the Research Lounge. So warm welcome to everyone and thank you very much for taking the precious time out of your evening to join us tonight, which will hopefully be very informative presentation and discussions. So tonight, the topic of the Research Lounge is the development of a novel intervention for use in community alcohol treatment services. We've kindly been joined by Stefan Rennick-Egglestone. Sorry, Stefan, who is going to be presenting the project, which has recently been published. So we'll jump into that in a moment. We do want to say that these discussions, and they are discussions, is hopefully going to be a reciprocal session today. So the mantra of all of the sessions is no question is a silly question. If you're thinking it, I guarantee I am as well. So please, we actively encourage questions, and then at the end, once we've finished, prompt discussions as well. So that's our time to have a chat amongst ourselves about what has been presented, the information that's been shared tonight. So re-emphasize again, please do ask questions away. We're here, and Stefan has kindly agreed. So if you have any questions while we're going through the information sharing, I'll be keeping a keen eye on everyone. So just give me a wave or put your hand up, and when the time's appropriate, we'll take the questions during the information sharing. There's no need to wait until the end. So with that in mind, I will pass over to Stefan, who will start the presentation. I'll stop sharing for you, Stefan.
Okay.
There we go, and hand over to yourself.
Thank you. So it's saying host disabled participant screen sharing again. So you might have to make me the host again.
1 second. Co-host, there you go. I've enabled you with the power again to share.
Good. And it's this one here. And has that come up? Can people see the slides?
Perfect. Yeah, getting nods around. Yeah.
So again, just to repeat, please, this should be very informal. Please do jump in as we go along. Any questions are good ones. And I thought before I jumped in, I thought I might share just a tiny bit of personal background, just to try and make sense of where my involvement in all of this has come from. So back in 2000 until 2008, I was actually a computer programmer. That was my first profession, and I came out of a computer science degree. But I remember coming to a point of time of just being quite dissatisfied with doing programming as a job. And I was lucky enough that I was put onto a project where I was the programmer for a research project looking at helping people recover from a stroke using technology, led by researchers at Sheffield Hallam. And I remember a really clear insight of just wanting to do what they were doing. So effectively doing health research rather than being a programmer. So I've made my way mostly into mental health research through quite a long pathway, including writing up that project as a PhD, finding colleagues interested in mental health to do research grants with, and then more recently being involved in studies around new interventions to try and help people who are misusing alcohol. And partly the reason for saying all of that is that it remains to be a bit of a treat to actually get out and talk to people about the work that I've been doing, because I sometimes have to pinch myself and think, how did I actually end up here? But the CLIFAD study that I'm going to talk about has probably been one of the most interesting ones I've worked on. And I'm very happy to be here and talk it through. So loosely, this presentation is based around a couple of recent papers. So the top one here that I'm pointing at describes how we developed a new intervention. And the second one here describes a trial of that intervention. It's a policy of the National Institute for Health Research, who funded us, and of our teams as well, that all of our work has to be published open access. So these are freely available to the public at those URLs, and Kate has said that she can share those URLs afterwards. So, you know, research has gone in a nice way, I think, and generally all of our work has to go out open access to the public. And all of this work is the product of a consortium of people called the CLIFAD Consortium, which represents a very broad range of interests. It has a substantial number of members of the public who are involved in a consortium. It includes people who are clinicians working in the area of liver health and alcohol, and researchers as well. So we're working towards ever larger trials of some of the interventions that we've been developing. So I'll progress my screen. But the new intervention that I'm going to talk about in this presentation, it combines two potentially quite simple things. It combines a scan of your liver using an ultrasound-based device that very rapidly can give you a score, which is a reasonable proxy to the health of your liver or the level of disease of your liver. So the machine that we work with is called a FibroScan machine, can be called transient elastography. So these are relatively cheap compared to some technologies devices that can be used by an operator who doesn't need too much training to give a very rapid scan of the liver. And what that means is these devices could be rolled out on a very large scale for not too much money compared to some technologies. And they do give you a score which tells you something about the health of your liver at that moment. So our intervention combines a scan with a FibroScan machine with some patient information that's tailored towards the score that you get from the machine. So you get different information if your liver is more diseased compared to your liver not being diseased. But certainly, importantly, from my perspective, the intervention includes a collection of videos where people describe how they have changed their life for a better after receiving one of these scores in the past. So these machines have been available for a while. So there are a certain number of people who have received those scores. And for people we've met, receiving a score was actually a significant feature of that person's pathway towards reducing their use of alcohol and improving their health. So in a way, our intervention is very simple. It's those two things together. But actually, to make it work in a healthcare setting is some of the complexity, and to make it work in a safe way is some of the complexity for us. But for me, the narrative side of the intervention is particularly interesting. And actually, for the last 6 years, before the CLIFAD study and in parallel with some of it, I've been working on a mental health study that's called NEON, for narrative experiences online. So NEON has been a large program of work that's been funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research. And it's been looking at whether access to accounts produced by other people that describe their recovery from mental health problems can help people affected by mental health problems. So before moving into work around CLIFAD, I thought I'd actually talk a bit about some of the background from NEON, because what we did in CLIFAD was we took knowledge from NEON and we translated it into an alcohol setting. So the NEON work is actually very relevant. And the fascinating thing that I think we would all know about around mental health, but where I've been a bit surprised about the depth, is that nowadays we very much live in a world where, on a very large scale, people are sharing their own accounts of mental health problems. It's a notable feature, I think, of the society we live in, that, for example, there are many public figures who have talked about experiences of sometimes quite severe mental health problems. And there will be many people in general in the population who actively talk about or share their own experiences. And some of those experiences and some of that writing and some of those videos have been grouped together into collections. So one of my favorites is a book called Beyond the Storms, that was produced by Recovery Devon, which is a community interest company in Devon. And Recovery Devon put a great deal of effort into working with individuals who'd experienced severe mental health problems and helping those people through the process of creating a narrative, a written narrative or a graphic narrative that described their experience and the process of recovery. So I think this was published about 10 years ago, but it's one example of many, many collections of books of mental health recovery narratives. But actually, near the start of the NEON study, I spent some time looking around to see, to find other examples of published works. And I was surprised to find that even back in 1954, a book of mental health recovery narratives was published. It was called The Plea for the Silent, and it was edited or assembled by Donald Mackey Johnson, who was a member of Parliament at the time. And it was very much assembled and published for two intentions, actually. So one was what we would now call reducing stigma about mental health problems. And the second was trying to challenge psychiatric abuses as they were taking place at the time and sadly continue to take place today. So you can only imagine the society that book went out into, when perhaps mental health may not have been quite talked about in quite the same depth that we are now. So it was published more than around 70 years ago. And then what's really interested me as I've learned more and more about the narratives that have been published is that even for the most stigmatized mental health experiences, people are still publishing and sharing narratives. So it seems to me that that experiences like psychosis are still stigmatized in our society. You will hear less public figures talking about them, for example, and it's less common to hear about people's experience of psychosis. But, organizations like the World Health Organization have tried to estimate how many people would experience an episode of psychosis at some point in their lifetime. And the best estimates from very large random surveys that try and do true random sampling of the population is that maybe 5 to 8% of people in the population will have an episode of psychosis at some point in their lifetime. So these are common experiences, but they're perhaps less well talked about, but people are regularly writing about them. And if you go on YouTube and type in psychosis recovery story and hit the down arrow, you'll never get to the bottom of the list of psychosis recovery videos that are there. So even for a still stigmatized experience like psychosis, people are still regularly talking about it. And if you look in some of the comments of those videos, you will see people talking about how those videos have helped that person. And again, one of my favorite books is a collection of narratives called Psychosis, Stories of Hope and Recovery, that was published again about 10 years ago with the intention of giving people or carers of people experiencing psychosis hope for the future, because actually psychosis recovery rates are fairly high. But people may not realize that. And then for me, a really interesting phenomenon is that, well, recovery narratives are widely published, but a whole range of organizations are trying to use these narratives as a form of intervention. So as a way of trying to help people in all kinds of different ways, actually. So there's lots of experimentation going on and lots of different organizations trying different ways of using published narratives or the concept of a recovery narrative to help people. So one that I came across again early in the NEON project was a project called Right to Recovery, which was put in place by the Scottish Recovery Network, who are a Scottish NHS-funded organisation. And Right to Recovery had two arms to it. But the concept for both of those was that was asking people to imagine their ideal future and then trying to support people to write a narrative that got them from where they are now to that ideal future. And Right to Recovery was done through a web application. So there was an online thing that people could sign up to that helped people write that narrative. And people from the Scottish Recovery Network travelled around communities in Scotland and did workshops with people in person to try and write those future recovery narratives. So one example of interesting experimentation around the idea of a recovery narrative. And then another one that we see on a really large scale. So in the UK, there's a real movement around recovery education. So the idea that if you're experiencing mental health problems, one route is to work with a healthcare professional and be treated in the traditional ways. Another may be to enter an educational program where you gain knowledge and social contacts that help you to recover because of what you've learned, rather than a treatment program. And recovery education is happening through places like recovery colleges, and Nottingham has one and Leicester has one, that offer courses that people can sign up for on a whole range of topics. But one that we keep seeing cropping up in loads of different recovery colleges is the Telling Your Story course, where people are helped through the process of sharing their story with the world, with the underpinning idea that sharing your story will help you because you're putting into words or putting into video what's happened to you. And it might help other people on the course as well, because people will realize that they have common experiences with the person who's sharing the story. So these are, two examples of interventions that are being built around recovery narratives. But for the NEON study, we had quite a different intervention. We worked with people around the world to build a collection of 659 narratives describing mental health recovery. We put them into a database, and we built a very simple interface, that basically the simplest interface we could come up with, that gave people access to that database. And then we evaluated that interface in a trial to see if access to that helped people. So I'll just give you a quick scan through it. So effectively, you have 4 ways of accessing narratives from our collection. You can ask a fairly standard algorithm to try and match you to a story in the collection based upon your previous pattern of usage. And the algorithm tries to find a narrative that might help you. You can get a random story from the collection. You can browse stories based upon their characteristics, or with My Stories, you can return to stories that have helped you in the past. And actually, this talk has come at a nice time, because last week we published our findings in World Psychiatry, which is a big and influential psychiatric journal. And our trial found that just having access to this interface for a year improved people's quality of life. And it also increased people's perception that their life had meaning. And feeling that your life has meaning is really important around mental health, because it's known to protect people against a whole range of difficult mental health symptoms like anxiety and depression. So that's a really important finding for us, that access to these narratives gave people the perception that their life had more meaning. So these are important findings. And again, we can all open access papers, and there's a couple of informal articles there as well. So Positive News, which is a print and online newspaper that only features good news rather than bad news, ran an article on us a few days ago. So nicely written and gives quite a good succinct view on the study. So I think, we feel really pleased that after 5 years of work, that we have found that access to mental health narratives helps people affected by mental health problems. And if you use our intervention, really, this is all you see. You go to a narrative, you see the narrative exactly as it was published, and you get the chance to give some feedback on how it's impacted you. So has it made you feel a bit better or a bit worse? And that assessment of whether it's made you feel a bit better or a bit worse goes into the algorithm and helps influence what you get next. So for me, this is really proof of concept evidence that just accessing narratives can help people. And we've looked into how that change occurs. And this is through interviewing somewhere around 150 people, and with asking those people to think about the past and also showing people narratives and talking to them about what it feels like to see them. And change occurs through things like recognizing shared experiences in the narrative, learning about how recovery happens. So, it can be terribly confusing if you're experiencing severe mental health problems and you don't know what to do next. Seeing someone's account of what they did next can be really influential. But also perhaps experiencing emotional release. And, often when people are experiencing mental health problems, they can have emotions stuffed up inside themselves. And just reading and seeing a narrative can help to release some of those emotions and can help someone feel a bit better because of it. And we've documented various forms of positive change that can come out of accessing narratives. So all of this provides the background theory that we've then tried to make use of in the CLIFAD intervention. So in the CLIFAD study, as I said before, the two components of our intervention were receiving a transient elastography, which is an ultrasound scan, also known as a fibroscan, and receiving access to a small collection, in our case, of alcohol misuse recovery narratives. So we had 10 narratives describing recovery after alcohol misuse, but those narratives were specifically produced for our study, whereas in NEON, we worked with existing narratives. And the development process behind our intervention was important because the concept for the intervention might seem simple, but turning that into something that will work in a busy alcohol treatment setting, in a health service which is stretched for resources, that might still help people and that isn't unsafe for people, is actually quite a complex translation process. And there will be many ways of taking that basic concept and getting it wrong. And when you put it into practice, it just doesn't work at all. So for our development process, which is, again, written up in detail in the open access paper here, really looked at two things. It looked at designing the interactions that happen in the clinic, so around receiving the fibroscan. How exactly do people receive the fibroscan and its results? How exactly do they receive access to the narratives? So that was one of our topics. The second one was designing the recovery narratives themselves. So, the word that could seem like a misnomer. They are true stories from people about alcohol misuse and recovery. They aren't fictional, but we wanted to work with those people to find ways to create an authentic narrative that had the best chance of having a positive impact on people. So we describe those two activities in our paper. And I think what I really liked about this project is I think that decisions have genuinely been co-produced between people with lived experience that's related to alcohol. So personal experiences of harmful or dangerous alcohol misuse, personal experiences of being a carer, and with researchers, which includes, of course, clinical staff with expertise of treating people. And of course, in reality, those two categories are not separated. There are people on the team who will sit between the two as well. And we have some input from the fibroscan operators themselves, who are already quite expert in working with patients around providing scores, because fibroscan does exist in the NHS already. Our intervention just makes greater use of it than existing use. And actually, as far as I've understood, and this was before I joined the project, some of the basic ideas behind this intervention came from public contributors. So the idea that a fibroscan by itself might change your life, and hence giving people the fibroscan could be a form of intervention, I've understood came from public contributors involved in the project. And I believe that the idea of incorporating narratives came about through discussions with public contributors. So it's potentially a study that's come about because of this tight collaboration between public contributors and clinicians and researchers. So roughly our methods for developing the intervention were on one hand, detailed focus groups with people bringing a whole range of perspectives to develop that in-clinic experience, that experience of receiving the FibroScan and receiving narrative access. And then co-production of a video production guide that we then gave to a videographer. And that videographer worked with some of our narrators and worked with them to produce videos. So that video production guide becomes something that encodes the knowledge we've developed, and we've shared it publicly with a license that enables other research studies to use it and modify it, of course, so it becomes a contribution to the development of future interventions. So there's lots of text on this slide, but it kind of had to be because first of all, I wanted to talk through some of the most important recommendations that came out of focus groups that incorporated people who were PPI members or involvement members, because these have kind of directed how we went about developing the intervention. Just need to move the video over so I can see all the text. Some of the most important insights that came out of discussions with PPI contributors were that the impact of narratives might be enhanced if they were accompanied by narratives from caregivers, so that people who were carers or caregivers could recount their experience of helping someone who was struggling with alcohol. And they might be enhanced if accompanied by a video from a clinician, so that the clinician could explain their perspective on alcohol. So that was a recommendation that we adopted, and we do have a carer video and a clinician video. There was a recommendation that FibroScan recipients may not feel fully informed even after they've been given standard patient information, because actually all of these interactions can be really confusing. And if you receive really bad news that your liver is in not a healthy state, you may not at all be in the right place to understand detailed patient information that you've been given. So we put a lot of care and attention into trying to design the most informative patient information that we could. A really important recommendation, which seems obvious now, but needed to be said, was that receiving a high FibroScan score can be quite shocking, because many people may not realise the extent of liver damage that they have, because people's livers can be harmed or damaged without any noticeable symptoms. But actually, it's very possible for you to have a very damaged liver, but just not to know about it. And perhaps the consequence of that shockingness of receiving that score is that in-person support might be needed by someone. For example, around receiving a video, we may not just be able to dump videos on people. We may need to actually support people as they take in that information. And of course, some people may not even be ready to receive videos directly after receiving a FibroScan. And we've seen that play out in our trials. And of course, it's important to note, and our PPI panel raised this to our focus groups, that some people may be digitally excluded, so may just not have the technology to access videos that we produce, or the knowledge to use that technology. And then another point that was raised in the meetings was that some people can experience stigma around alcohol use from religious community membership. So can feel like quite a specific point, but it raises the bigger issue of stigma, which we then had to take into account as we worked out how to produce narratives. So important recommendations that are documented in the paper for use by others. So the decisions that we all made as a consortium from those recommendations and from discussions was that, yeah, we would record mostly service user videos, so mostly videos describing receiving a FibroScan, alcohol misuse, but periods of recovery. But we would aim to record at least one carer video and have a clinician video. We decided that the narrator should be able to choose the setting for their video, partly because we wanted to make the narrator comfortable, but also we wanted the narrator, if they chose, to choose a setting that was meaningful for them and had a relevance to their narrative. Partly from the recommendation around stigma and religious communities, well, the bigger picture was We knew that some people may wish to control what was revealed about their identity. So we decided to give the narrator the absolute choice over what was revealed about their identity. And we know from some mental health studies that forcibly removing someone's identity, as is common research practice when you're working with interviews, could be perceived as a form of harm because it's someone's story. You can't separate someone from it. But equally, there is stigma around alcohol misuse, and some people may want to occlude part of their identity as well. And we did decide, and I think we will revisit this decision, is that access to video should be in the clinic only, and people could return at later date if they wanted. And this was really around concerns around people being very distressed after seeing a video. But I think what we found in our small trial was that some people didn't look at the videos because really they just weren't ready for them after receiving a score, and then didn't come back to the clinic. And actually, it probably would have been better to let people see the videos at home or in a setting of their own choosing. So that was a choice we made for our feasibility trial, so our small first trial. But as we worked towards a bigger trial, I think we'll revisit that. And importantly, for the narrators, the people in our videos, those people self-identified as being in a recovery process. So we didn't impose a definition, and that's because recovery can mean different things to different people. So I think there are other decisions documented in the paper, but for me, these are the 5 most important decisions that we took. And then we did want to create narratives that were authentic and true and real, but that also maximize beneficial impact on the person looking at them. And this is one place where we worked from all of the work from Neon to try and work out, for our video production guide, how might we maximize impact? And really, a lot of that was about preserving or enabling authenticity. We wanted people to tell us their real story, keeping themselves safe where they wanted to, but we didn't want people to feel that they had to tell their story in a stereotypical way that excluded some detail. So broadly, our videographer asked people about what recovery meant to the person, because that can be different for each person. The videographer asked, what has helped your recovery? And that was phrased in different ways for different people, but that was a broad topic. And the videographer asked, what have you learned about recovery? And within those 3 categories, we had somewhere around 20 prompting questions, but they were the 3 broad categories that were asked about for our video. And to enable the person in the trial to connect to the narrative a bit more, the first screen had the estimated first FibroScan score that person received. It may have been the true score, but for some people, they couldn't remember the precise score. So we asked people to estimate what their first score was. So that helped the person watching the video to match it up to the score they just received from the FibroScan machine. So we made a decision again that most of the videos would be reserved for someone who was going through alcohol treatment. So they weren't going to be truly public. So again, that was partly to help narrators feel comfortable. But 2 participants gave extra consent for their video to be published through YouTube, so to be made a public artifact. And Steve Ryder, who was the chief investigator for the grant, also produced a video from his own perspective. So I thought I might show you maybe Steve's video and then maybe one of the other 2, given time constraints. But perhaps because the videos are kind of 3 or 4 minutes each, so before I jump into them, it might be a good time to ask if, from what I've talked about so far, whether there are questions or topics that people would like to talk through.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stefan. Any questions, Richard?
Oh, I've got a whole host of them there, Stefan. But
Good.
this will take about half an hour to go through.
Yeah, that's all right. We've got plenty of time, so...
Oh dear, where do I start? I don't want to monopolise the meeting. Where do I start? Right, But one thing, the FibroScan isn't exact science, is it? It's normally an indicator. It measures the stiffness of the liver.
Yeah,
The
that's
actual
right.
cause of that stiffness needs to be investigated further,
Yeah,
not just assume that it's alcohol related.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
So I've been around with the British Liver Trust's Love Your Liver roadshow, and I've done about 5 or 6 of these now. And when the patient or the client is given a letter to refer back to their GP for further testing to be done, going through your presentation, it seems like a FibroScan means alcohol.
Oh, okay, yeah, so that's perhaps
Yeah,
just
and I think that I found that quite off-putting. A person has hepatitis C and just have a
Yeah.
stiffness of the liver, but now we've already automatically labeled them alcohol.
Yeah. So that's a bit of detail that's missing then. So
Yeah, I think so. And
so there's,
the other thing,
okay, carry on. Sorry, carry on.
sorry. The mental health aspect of it. Normally, in most NHS operations, mental health comes under a separate NHS trust to the main hospital.
Yeah.
So a person can end up with a variceal bleed, go into hospital, and soon as nobody is interested in their mental health aspect because it's nothing to do with them, that belongs to another NHS trust.
Yeah.
So they'll probably get a letter from the alcohol liaison nurse to say this guy needs further treatment or her. We recommend they go to the other trust for help with their alcohol addiction or alcohol problems. So there was a bit of confusion there as how you recruited these people, because a lot of people, when they are actually in the hospital with a variceal bleed or ascites or whatever, they don't get the aftercare because they don't get referred onwards to a mental health place. I recently did a paper, and I've called this alcohol-related liver disease victims of circumstance. And what I mean by that is people end up getting a mental health condition and turning to alcohol as a form of self-medication through the actions of other people. Over on the British Liver Trust Health Unlocked site, I'll give you 2 examples of this. I befriended the lady, I was offering support to this particular lady who had cirrhosis of the liver. She was 34 years of age, which is quite young to get cirrhosis, and it took a while to gain her confidence. And we were exchanging private messages and what have you. And eventually she turned round that 11 years previously, she had gone out, was Friday night with some friends, and on the way home, she had been raped. And for 11 years, she blamed herself, and she never told anyone. But she was using alcohol, A, to blank out the problem, but also she was feeling this guilt that she caused her own demise, and therefore she was using alcohol to blank out the feeling of guilt. So you can understand from her perspective why she was abusing alcohol.
Yeah.
And there was another one of a young girl, 24 years of age, now with cirrhosis of the liver. And when you, once again, you break down and you get to hear their story, what happened was when she was 14, she watched her mother and father having an almighty row, where the father turned around and murdered her mother in front of her. And that girl went through her late teens and into her early 20s, blaming herself for not standing up to her father. So you can see how these people turn to alcohol with these mental health conditions, and everyone's got a story to tell. That guy on the park bench I often refer to, who's drunk as a lord, what people don't see, they just see a drunken idiot in the park. But what they don't see is that guy had done 2 tours in Afghanistan and saw his best friend blown to bits. There's always a mental health condition there. And to treat liver disease, you've got to treat the mental health aspect. But like I say, the problem is that belongs to another healthcare trust, nothing to do with us. Yeah. And I think that's where the breakdown is coming. Sorry, don't mean to ramble on too much. Yeah. There were some bits you did mention about the stigma aspect of it. And I'm with a program, the Arms Hub, that's trying to destigmatize this. And one of the things I've got to know about is that around about 84% of people who end up with a serious liver condition aren't actually addicted. They certainly have a drink problem, but they drink because they choose to. The remaining 16% are the ones that have an addiction and are now drinking because they have to. But there's nothing in your presentation there to segregate these 2 people. The ones obviously with the addiction have forgotten why they started drinking in the first place, because it's the alcohol now driving their addiction. need. Whereas the other ones are drinking because they have to. It could be from a traumatic experience. It could be for some other reasons. But getting them to open up and understand that question, why you drank or what is driving you to want to drink, that needs to be broken down and segregate. I'm trying to get people to do away with this alcoholic label that stigmatizes people. A person, if you are going to give someone an alcoholic label, it should be the person that's got an addiction, not the 84% who have a problem with alcohol. So I don't know, it's a bit up in the air at the moment. And of course, a lot of research is going on.
Yeah,
I'll shut up now.
that's good. Yeah, well, shall I answer all those bits then? So first of all, so the missing bit of information that I could have mentioned earlier on was that the intervention that's been developed by CLIFAD is intended for use only in community alcohol treatment services. So people who get access to the FibroScan plus the patient information plus the narratives have already been working through the healthcare system. They've already worked with a healthcare professional who has concluded that alcohol in some form is one of the things that needs to be addressed. And they've been referred to an existing treatment service. So actually that answers around the question as why we're replacing FibroScan with alcohol. And actually it's just because the people we're working with, they're already on that pathway. So that's just missing a bit of information that I should have explained. Yeah, and I think I mean I 100% agree on everything you said around the mental health side. And our trial was a small one because, as you'll know, in health research, you tend to do a smaller trial first to look at safety, for example, before going on to the larger trial. But one of the things that came up as a finding from the trial was that for those people who the NHS had recorded as having some form of mental health diagnosis, they were the people who were more likely to want to look at the videos. So even in terms of people's relationship to the videos, there was something there about mental health. And in some ways, the relationship with the previous work around narratives and mental health is there because, well, when you're doing that first small feasibility trial, I didn't truly know what was going to happen. But at least by taking ideas from an existing project that has tried out a narrative-based intervention for real with about 2,000 people, that gave us some idea as to how narratives might help people. And of course, it could have been that you put them into an alcohol setting and works completely differently or not at all. So really, that knowledge from mental health is there as a bit of a bootstrapping tool to try and really it helped us to produce the videos and to work with people to select the content for the videos. But then, after the alcohol trial, we did interviews with people. We're in the process of analysing those. So we'll learn something from those interviews about how the FibroScan and the videos together actually impacted people. And could well be, there'll be similarities and differences between how mental health narratives have affected people in our other study. But you're right, I mean, and there is this structural problem, as you say, with the NHS being very segregated.
Yeah.
And I think it's even worse than that, isn't it? It's actually,
Sorry, I know Dave's got his hand up, and I don't want to monopolise. But very briefly, up here at Stoke-on-Trent, we've got a local alcohol and drug support group, and I did ask them about how people that come along to them, how they those that have got an alcohol problem, are they classed the same as those who have an addiction? And they said everyone that comes through our door is an alcoholic. And I really hate that label for a start off.
Exactly.
And no one seems to sort of understand the mindset.
Yeah.
Nobody bothers because everyone's been labelled the same.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to, in the communities, we've got to break that barrier down.
And we would never now, no one, I hope, would ever use the term schizophrenic, because it's been discarded as being wrong and discriminatory and labelling. But you're right, alcoholic remains used when schizophrenic has been chucked out as a term.
Yes.
Degree is really, this is exactly the purpose of these sessions as well, is to have these conversations. So Thank you so much. I'm just aware, Dave, you've had your hand up for a little while, so would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just about what you was talking about, where this comes under, because there's some people that are addicted, but quite heavily to alcohol. But if they stop, it'll also kill them. I was wondering where this came. It was quite an interesting one because one of my university friends died last year, and he had a severe alcohol problem, and he'd been married for quite good a daughter, don't we? Probably in her 20s or 30s at least, and his wife didn't realise when I went over just before COVID. I said, if he stops drinking, it'll kill him. What she ended up doing was watering down his wine, and so trying to control what have you. But it's sort of a interesting one. I just wonder where it fitted in with what you were saying earlier, just a subset of addiction.
Yeah, I think similar things. So again, for our study, because we from the start knew we were only going to recruit from existing alcohol treatment services, then we were working with people who had available to them the medical experts who could help people through the process of handling alcohol withdrawal. So in some ways, the setting that we worked in for this small trial, and we're currently applying for the funding for the larger trial that comes from it, will be in the same setting. Effectively, that is the simplest setting to work with, probably, around alcohol treatment, because the medical support is in place there. Now we are now starting to think about the bigger picture of course, many people are experiencing difficulties around alcohol and are not in an alcohol treatment setting with medical support. So we're thinking about the larger program of work that enables interventions a bit like this to function, but not in an alcohol treatment setting. So for example, FibroScan is sufficiently cheap that it could go into every branch of Boots in the future. That kind of rollout is possible, but then you would be seeing people who might suddenly learn about liver damage, for example, but wouldn't be part of any treatment pathway at that point, although of course they could join one. So it's a much more complex picture to think about around developing interventions that include FibroScans in that setting. So yes, certainly we've started, I think, with the easiest setting in this kind of context.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, and yeah, thank you, Stefan and Richard, for you. I'm sure you've got more, but I mean, like I say, these events, it's the start of a conversation, it's not like the end. So what we want to do is carry it on going. I'm just aware of time, and that Stefan did want to play the videos to try and bring this to life a little bit. So would you want to play both of the videos, Stefan, don't you?
Yeah, should we show Steve's video and then one of the others, please? So you can kind of see what we ended up producing. So let me see if I can.
We've talked about it. Let's yeah.
So let's hang on. Stop sharing that screen. And then share screen.
And share audio.
Yeah, I'm just trying, my web browser's not coming up in the sharing screen bit.
Oh no.
Oh, that's strange. The videos are in front of me.
Yeah.
Let's have another go. Oh yeah, I think it's going to work now. So it should be. So shout out if the sound doesn't work, but this should be Steve Ryder's video.
Yep, it's working. Go.
I'm Steve Ryder, and I'm a hepatologist, a liver doctor based in Nottingham, and I've been a liver specialist now here for 25 years. Liver disease is something that develops very silently in the background in someone who may feel perfectly well still at the time. If people drink more than their safe drinking limits, it causes a build-up of fat in their liver, And that's the first sign of injury, and that injury heals with scarring. And it's a gradual build-up of scarring in the liver that in the end causes the liver to fail. If the liver fails, it has a whole series of knock-ons in terms of other systems not working properly. And of course the biggest problem with your liver is it doesn't give you any warning. Quite a lot of people end up with long hospital stays, and quite a lot of people die before their liver has a chance to recover. So for me, trying to diagnose liver disease earlier is a really critical thing. We now have technologies that can tell you, even if you don't have any symptoms, whether you have developed or are developing a problem in your liver. And I think knowing if you're going to suffer any physical consequences might help make with some of those decisions. Do I go home and continue to take, lots of alcohol, or does this focus my mind that I don't want to develop some of those physical health problems from it? For me, it's trying to use the medical bit in a way to balance those other issues. People drink for a reason, and it's an addictive substance. Lots of people run into trouble with it. Probably the best ways of providing a diagnosis for people now into the liver is a fibroscan, is a test where we actually measure whether the liver's had any permanent damage or scarring done to it. People get a number, there's a reading that appears on the device, and we know that the higher the number, the more damage there is in the liver, so it's a pretty simple score. I think where we can help is both providing that technology and interpreting it. So saying to people, if you've got a normal liver, that's fantastic. If you are able to get on top of the alcohol side of things, that means you'll never suffer a liver problem. It's a really positive thing for people to focus on. I think at the other end of the scale, if people already have a badly scarred liver, the urgency with which they and we need to take it just goes up very significantly. Scarring in the liver as a result of previous damage tends to stay there. So it isn't as if the clock's set to zero again. If people stop drinking, they've still got that scar tissue. But there's also the ongoing damage from alcohol in the liver, and that's completely recoverable. So if there's no more alcohol going in, there's no more injury in the liver. It's not just about giving people a number. It's about trying to support people in making those choices about their life to preserve both their life and their quality of life, really.
Steve's video. Then I think I'll show you.
He speaks so elegantly, doesn't
He does, yes.
he? Very soothing.
And now I'm going to show you Claire's video, I think.
Yeah.
4 o'clock was my going down the spiral time. Coming home from teaching, pick my boys up from the childminder. The first thing I do is probably I thought of it as reward myself with a glass of wine. But I couldn't stop. Really didn't think it'd do any harm. I felt as though I was losing control, especially when my boys went, but I needed them to go so I could protect them. It broke my soul because I was at such a low ebb in my life. I was constantly wanting that feel-good factor from the alcohol, and it was just mayhem. I had lost friends, many friends. I'd lost my family. There was nobody. And then I found Matt. And we carried on drinking. We used to enjoy a drink because we'd known each other since university days. And my alcohol was in free flow constantly. I'm lying in that hospital bed in the liver unit, absolutely scared stiff, and I didn't know why. I was told by my consultant, if it's infected, we will need to look at transplant. But if not, you should be okay. I was there in bed that night and I was facing truth. It's not easy, but something happened to me in that hospital over the time that I was in there. And when I came home, I did not want to drink one drop. I was in bed for a year after that because I just could not move. There was that much pressure. So I had a year in bed. Matt left his job to come and help me. So there was no mortgage being paid. And I held on to the house as long as I could. And this is where we are now. My days consist of peacefulness, and I'm getting better at accepting. If you feel as though you need to stop or cut down, find somebody, a family member who you can trust. I trust Matt, and he got me through. The knowledge I've gained about my liver, if I'd have known before what damage I was doing, I wasn't educated, and so I just thought, yeah, I'm just gonna keep drinking. I think it's about determination. You know, you've been given the numbers, etc., etc. Your lowest ebb. It was one hell of a scary ride I've been on. But I know now that I'm here to try and help people. And not say, oh, I did this, so you go and do it. You know, it's just me. That regular person that's lost a lot.
So it's a really impactful video, I think, that one. And, you know, certainly has influenced me, I think, in terms of thinking about alcohol. But I think you can imagine that if someone had got a very high score, possibly that video could be incredibly helpful, but for some people, they may also not be in the right place to see it immediately as well, because it is a difficult video to watch. So perhaps that brings to light just some of the challenges around actually incorporating these kind of stories into a treatment, because I think I can imagine that could really help some people, but it really, really could be very difficult for some people as well at the same time. So yeah, hopefully that's given you a flavour, and we had 10 narratives roughly of that form describing different experiences in different settings.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we're all kind of like, it's such in like stunned to silence.
That's
Like
yeah.
Processing, I think I am, because it is a very impactful.
It is, yeah. No,
Yeah,
it is.
powerful. Yeah, I mean, I am aware of the time, but I also want everyone the opportunity to kind of reflect on the video. So, I mean, does anyone want to share their thoughts about that?
There was one thing I was going to say, and that is the role of the alcohol liaison nurse within hospitals. I know it's up at Nottingham, you've got some fantastic staff up there. But there's a story behind this. If you look at the Royal College of Nursing and look up the role of the alcohol liaison nurse, it says there that they had a trouble. They used to always come from a psychiatric background and recruit these nurses. So they knew about things like a bit about addiction and drug and alcohol abuse, if you like. But because they had a trouble of recruiting them, they started opening up recruitment to any nurse or anyone from a medical qualification could become an alcohol liaison nurse. And I often wonder, even now, if you had someone, say a hospital in Nottingham, who had an alcohol liaison nurse with a psychiatric background against one in Coventry who had a background of midwifery. Who's going to understand the mental aspects of alcohol abuse better? And I think there's a danger there of recruiting these people without a background. There was a lovely alcohol liaison nurse up in Nottingham I was speaking to about this, and she was telling me that she trains all her staff on, get this right, alcohol fetal syndrome. Whereas a lot of hospitals won't even do that. Oh no, that's child, it's nothing to do with us. But it goes to show how some hospitals are attacking it differently to others, which then brings about a postcode lottery and everything goes messed up. I just sort of throw that one in there.
I think that's interesting, and again, you know, similarly, for example, in Nottinghamshire, in Notts Healthcare Trust, which is the trust I'm most associated with, we have a lot of mental health peer support workers who are there, and they're in teams bringing, you know, their own personal expertise for mental health problems. But there are many other trusts that won't have as many, and in different trusts they'll be integrated into teams in different ways. So, you know, we know there's a real risk for peer support workers of just being given basic administration jobs, for example. So yeah, as you say, probably.
And another thing I just quickly say, when the FibroScan things started off, and I wanted to get one for our local hospital and start a fundraising thing, and I befriended a lady down in Southampton who had an alcohol liaison nurse down there, sorry, a liver specialist nurse, who had done that, raised the funds to get a mobile FibroScan. And I thought, well, if she can do it, I can do it for Stoke-on-Trent. But I had a lot of resistance from people, and it got a bit weird. But what I wanted to try and do is, in Birmingham particularly, the Punjabi community have a terrible alcohol problem. And they try to deal with this in-house within the community. And there's a lot of stigma attached to by other family members. Oh, don't talk to that family, his son's an alcoholic and all this and that. There's a lot of shame factor there. And I wanted to be able to use the FibroScan to get into these communities, not so much identify the alcohol aspect, but all liver damage through Hep C, Hep A, and all that, to early indication of liver damage. But you could then identify the ones with an alcohol problem, not putting a label on them, but let them get the treatment. And that way it reduces the stigma. And that's what I wanted to do, but it never came to fruition.
No, that's challenging, isn't it? And it's, yeah, it was notable that of our 10 videos, there was actually in the end only one person who did choose to occlude their identity by having their faces blurred out.
All right.
And that was someone from a Southeast Asian community who wanted to occlude their face because they were worried about what their community would say.
Yeah.
So, you know, small sample, but that was notable, I think, in those videos.
Yeah, but it could help break down barriers, I think.
And that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
That's some really, I mean, my mind's whirling with possible, you know, potential involvement projects, and you've mentioned a specific community, you know, I'm sorry, but Dave, your hands up.
Yeah, just a quick one. I'm not being too nosy, but Richard, are you a consultant? I remember the public. I didn't quite follow at the beginning.
I'm sorry. I'm just a member of the public. I've got I had a varicose bleed in 2014 through alcohol abuse. I then went on to have mild ascites. In 2016, I had 5 tumours on my liver, of which 3 were burnt off through liver ablation. And then I had a liver transplant in 2016. But I'm just coming up for 10 years alcohol free. So I can do it, anyone can do it.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
That's all right.
Looking for you, see if you can move on to something like Nottingham University or Birmingham University, but no chance.
Professional advocate, that's
I've recently befriended, is it Samantha Jewett?
Yes.
Yeah. So we were exchanging messages before Christmas, so that's good.
Oh, that's good. Oh, well, no, thank you so much, you know, for sharing your experiences as well. I mean, as I said, this is kind of a start of a conversation, and we'd like you know, yourselves and others to get more involved in our research, especially relating to this. So I am actually going to go away and think about how, because we work with the liver team, the research team, and we definitely need to do more about going out into the community, and especially where stigma may be more prevalent in certain communities relation to the cultural and community elements. We do have our mobile research unit as well, so that's like the research bus, which has been in Clifton and Hyson Green in Nottingham, like basically to raise awareness of research, to deliver research in the community. On our maiden voyage of the unit, we were based in Nottingham city centre, and we actually delivered a FibroScan study on one of the days, and it was immensely popular. You know, we thought we were going to be stood there and having to advertise it to people, but people were actually queuing. I had a queue of people waiting to talk to me at one point because we were there, we were present, we were accessible. It was right outside our Primark in the city centre.
Yeah.
When you talk to them about a FibroScan and what that meant and taking part in the study, people, the question they asked was, "Is it free?" Like they were willing to do it. We actually booked out clinics for like, I think at least 2 weekends after that. So, you know,
and I've been out with the British Liver Trust one and trying to get people to come on board and have their FibroScan done. Oh no, my liver's fine. And just because nobody tells them that the liver doesn't have any pain receptors, so it can't tell you when it's getting poorly and damaged. But once you engage with them and talk to them about it, you can coax them to come on in and have it done. You know?
And it's that conversations.
Once they come in and I say, look, if nothing's found, at least you've got peace of mind. And you can go away happy and go up Wetherspoons if you want. But, you know, come in and have a go. I'm always light-hearted about it, you know, but...
Yeah, that's it.
Can I leave you with a little anecdote? A few years ago, I was... it was probably whiskey, a bottle of whiskey. I was putting a small amount in my tea in the morning. I did this for about 2 weeks. Then I decided I wouldn't do. I phoned my daughter up, my eldest daughter up. I said, I had a cup of tea today without whiskey, and I really enjoyed it. It was the taste. I don't know about anybody else. I'm one of these people that I drink something, then I get bored with it. It can be milk, it can be beer, it can. It will stop this. I'll go on to something else. It doesn't have to be alcohol or what have you. But yes, my eldest daughter thought that was rather amusing.
Yes, I like the taste.
I remember going to bed and breakfast in Scotland where they offered whiskey in the porridge in the morning, which was quite tasty actually. I quite enjoyed it.
Just a quick one for you, Stefan. I was up in Liverpool on a liver meeting not so just before Christmas, and I met a gentleman there who is actually writing algorithms for an AI program to look at liver cirrhosis.
Right. Okay.
And I think that's a way forward, and I'm frightened how that's going to come out. But you would know more about that sort of thing than I would.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what they're doing. Yeah, and there's obviously lots of applications of algorithms in loads of areas of health now, like analysis of imaging of cancers, for example, is one of the areas where it's really taking off.
Yeah, he was down at the UCL in London, so it was really interesting to hear him talk about the algorithms he was writing and that. And I was quite frightened by it, actually.
Well, that's a whole other conversation in itself.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence and applying that to diagnosis. We actually are going to do a research lounge on that.
Really good. That'd be fantastic.
There you go.
No, I cracked a joke at the time because I thought of Little Britain, an episode of Little Britain where it says, "Oh, sorry, the computer says no."
Brilliant. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Famously, I'm known for going over on these things because I like to chat, but I've taken enough of your time out of your evening. So just to thank you again for attending. We really appreciate it and start a conversation. So I'll send an email follow up after this to ask for some feedback with, as we said, sharing some information from the event and how to get involved in other activities relating to liver research and future events.
There we go. Great.
So
Lovely.
thank you so much.
Good night, all. Thank you.
Nice
Bye.
to see you all.
Thanks everybody for being so entertaining.
Bye-bye. Take care.